Hi, this is the class prep for thermoregulation, and our exemplars that we'll be covering is multi-system failure related to heat stroke, hypothermia, and drowning. The failure of the thermoregulation system in our body leads to multi-system organ dysfunction. And the two pictures that I have here on the right is a runner that is running on a very hot day. This happened to be the Boston Marathon back in 12. They had, I believe it was at least 12 heat stroke victims during that race. It was a very hot day. On the left-hand side, you'll see Jack Dawson and Rose from the Titanic. And once we go through hypothermia, and you will understand what it is, why Rose made it and he did not. Temperature regulation is regulated by two main factors. We have to have heat production within the body, and we regulate the heat loss. And so that keeps our body at a pretty good around 37 degrees. The hypothalamus is responsible for to the various temperature receptors located out throughout the body. It also will makes the physiological adjustments to keep a constant core temperature, and you'll see what that means a little bit later on. So the hypothalamus is a very small portion located inside the brain, and depending on the heat sensors, the temperature sensors peripherally, it will create some changes. And for example, as we heat up, the hypothalamus will say, okay, we need some peripheral vasodilation here. If we vasodilate, we have more blood at the surface, which cools. That's why people's faces get red. Sweating, let's get the temperature down. We'll get some water there. We'll lose a little sodium, but the sweating usually brings us down pretty good. And then to increase our body temperature, if we're too cold, we will shiver, and the shiver is our muscles doing that. And that in shivering, we're increasing temperature, heat production. Epinephrine will be increased. That will increase our, as you know, increases our heart rate. If we increase our heart rate, we increase the cardiac output, which is increasing energy and pulses, the increases of pulses. So it's kind of a cascade of things, and that increases heat production also. So in contrast to decreasing body temperatures, what we'll do is we'll actually vasoconstrict when the body is cold. And we're shunting the blood back to the core to keep those vital organs functioning the best they can be. So heat production is heat's produced by complex metabolic activities. It's produced by the skeletal muscles, and it's also produced by non-shivering thermogenesis in newborns. Newborns do not have the ability to shiver. They're not fully developed yet, so they have these deposits of brown fat, which when they get cold can actually produce heat. About a month and a half after they're born, that disappears. So it's really important to keep them covered and monitor their temperature. Heat loss mechanisms, this is a review from your maternity: radiation, conduction, convection, evaporation, that sort of thing. We're going to be associating these with our heat stroke, hypothermia, and that sort of thing. So for example, conduction, if someone is immersed in cold water, the rate of heat loss is amazingly high compared to radiation or convection. Convection heat loss could be from a wind chill or a fan, and of course evaporation is sweating and evaporating off the surface of the body. So a basic understanding of these will be good. You'll be able to put them to use when we talk about the heat and hypothermia. Core temperatures, it's our internal temperature. The average, I would say, is around 37. It's typically 1 to 2 degrees higher than the surface temp. And ways that we can monitor that are rectal probes, a bladder probe, which will actually be inside of a catheter. And that's a great way to get an internal temperature. Critically ill patients may have a pulmonary artery catheter, Swan-Ganz, and in there's a temperature probe where we can actually measure the temperature of the pulmonary artery. Esophageal probe, where this is a probe that's put down into the esophagus, usually about 3/4 of the way down, and that gives us an excellent internal temperature. If you have someone that's very ill, core temperatures are very important. So those are the modalities that you may use. Non-invasive temperatures are fine based on what it is that you're doing and taking them correctly. Oral temperatures, would be affected by the ambient air temperature, or if they just had something hot or cold, we wouldn't get a real good temperature on. Same with the tympanic. If it's not done correctly, we can get quite a variation there. So, but sometimes the oral and axillary is all we have to work with. So just be aware of the differences in that. So why is the core temp so important? That core temp determines the temperature of the blood flow to the vital internal organs. So it's the blood that's flowing through the body that brings the heat and maintains the heat in the core. The skin serves as like an insulation or a shell that protects the core for temperature, and between the vasoconstriction and dilation really helps keep that temperature constant. Consequences of inadequate thermoregulation depend on two things: the extent of the temperature change and the duration of that variation. So the extent and duration make a difference whether it's hot or cold. For example, with heat stroke, unlike heat exhaustion, heat stroke is a true medical emergency. This person has heated up for some reason and their temperature reaches 40 degrees centigrade, which is quite high. These folks have a high mortality rate if they're not treated, and as the blood warms up and circulates, the blood heats up the organs get aren't functioning right, and eventually that you die. So heat stroke is something that you want to get treated right away. Heat exhaustion is usually due to someone that is working outside or something like that, where they begin to sweat and they continue to sweat. They don't feel good. They're losing a little bit of sodium, that sort of stuff. But these folks, their core temperature doesn't change all that much, and you can usually give them some PO fluids, remove them from the heat area, and they'll be fine. With heat stroke, heat exhaustion can turn into heat stroke, but with heat stroke, you're not sweating anymore. That system has failed, and that's when your body core temperature increases. So there's exertional heat stroke and classic heat stroke. Exertional heat stroke was that example of the guy that was running the marathon, and it was too hot. The ambient temperature was too hot, and he exercised for too long in the heat, and he became a medical emergency. Classic heat stroke is usually when you're sitting in a house that it's really hot and you don't have air conditioning, and it's kind of something that happens over a period of time. Usually classic heat stroke is for you see in the elderly or the ill, so you can see the difference in the two. Hyperthermia consequences, I kind of went through this already. With the sweating, you get sodium loss, dehydration, and if you don't rehydrate, of course your blood pressure is down, your heart rate's up. That's how the body compensates. Your perfusion decreases, your coagulation is up because your blood is thicker, it's not moving as well. You end up with cerebral edema with the low sodiums. You end up with necrosis and death. So hyperthermia is nothing to be scoffed at. Hypothermia, the core temp is below 35. Again, that's pretty cold. The body loses heat faster than it can produce it. And that results in hypothermia. One of the cardinal signs is confused thinking with hypothermia. These folks, because of the lack of circulation and the cooling of the organs within the body, they're not thinking straight, and it prevents this self-awareness. You may have heard that people take off their clothes because they feel hot, that sort of thing. So hypothermia in itself has its own consequences. With prolonged hypothermia, of course, we start out with vasoconstriction. That's the way we normally would shunt the blood to our core. if it's completely, if it's prolonged, you can actually get tissue necrosis, and you see this with frostbite, the tips of the fingers, the toes, and that sort of thing. You can literally freeze that area and get necrosis. And it can lead to actual organ failure. You don't shiver anymore because it's not doing anything. You get decreased cerebral blood flow. You're not making the heat through metabolic activity, and you end up with death. So if the hypothermia is treated correctly, it's better to be cold, put it this way, and we can warm you up. What do they say? It's you're not dead. I can't remember that one. There's a saying that you're not dead till you're warm and dead, because you can be cold without a pulse and respirations, and people have come back from that because of what we have for treatments these days. The last exemplar is drowning, and that's the leading cause of accidental death in the United States in children 1 through 4. And it's a very scary event, but the issues with this one here is the makeup of the water that someone has drowned in makes a difference in the pathophysiology of the event. Is it chemical water? Is it fresh water? Is it saline? Is there dirt or mud, or that sort of thing, and it makes a huge difference. The duration, severity of the hypoxemia are also 2 very important factors to determine outcomes in drowning. And true to the hypothermia, cold water seems to have more of a protective effect on the body than warm water does. And so that's all for now. Please bring your text to class. We'll be discussing risks and that sort of thing, treatments, and also prevention of these exemplars. As always, if any questions, let me know, and I'll see you in class.